The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven's towering glass buildings. Commander Jake Morrison stood at his office window on the 40th floor, watching hover cars drift between the structures like mechanical birds. The city stretched out below him for miles in every direction, home to 12 million people who had made this distant world their new Earth. Jake had lived in New Haven for 15 years. Ever since he joined the Colonial Defense Force as a young recruit. Now at 35, he was the city's most decorated soldier. His uniform displayed rows of medals earned in battles across 3 different star systems. The people of New Haven trusted him to keep them safe, and he had never let them down. A sharp beep from his communication device interrupted his thoughts. The screen showed an urgent message from General Peter Knox. Emergency meeting in the command center. All senior officers report immediately. Jake grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. The ride down to the command center took only minutes, but his mind raced with possibilities. Emergency meetings were rare in New Haven. The city's energy shields had protected them from every threat for over 2 decades. Pirates, hostile aliens, even natural disasters had all been turned away by their advanced defenses. The command center buzzed with activity when Jake arrived. Dozens of technicians sat at glowing screens, analyzing data streams from satellites and sensor networks. General Knox stood at the center of it all, his gray hair disheveled and his face grim. Jake had never seen his commanding officer look so worried. "Morrison, thank God you're here," Knox said, waving Jake over to a large display screen. "We have a situation unlike anything we've faced before." The screen showed a map of the continent, with New Haven marked as a bright blue dot in the center. To the south lay the Crimson Wastes, a vast desert region where mining companies had built several outposts to extract rare metals from the red sand. Red warning indicators flashed at 3 different locations in the wasteland. What happened to the mining stations? Jake asked, studying the display. Knox tapped a control pad, and the screen switched to satellite images. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Where mining station Alpha 7 should have been, only twisted metal and glass remained. The destruction was complete and absolute. Nothing had survived. "This happened 2 days ago," Knox explained. "We lost contact with Alpha 7 during a night shift. When the morning satellite pass came through, this is what we found." Jake had seen battle damage before, but this was different. The metal structures hadn't just been destroyed. They had been melted and reshaped into strange, flowing patterns. Some pieces looked almost artistic, like sculptures made from what had once been industrial equipment. Equipment malfunction? Jake suggested, though he didn't believe it himself. Knox shook his head and switched to another image. Mining Station Beta 12 showed similar destruction, but here Jake could see something else. Massive gouges in the ground led away from the ruined station, each one the size of a small building. Whatever had caused this destruction had feet. The 3rd station, Delta 9, was hit just 6 hours ago, Knox continued. This time we had a survivor. The screen changed to show a recording from a hospital room. A young woman in mining coveralls sat up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. Jake recognized her as one of the shift supervisors from the mining division. "Tell me what you saw, Kelly," came a voice from off-screen. Kelly Brown shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "It was huge, bigger than anything I've ever seen. At first I thought it was a landslide, but then I saw the shape moving through the dust cloud." "What kind of shape?" The interviewer pressed. "Like something from the old Earth stories my grandmother used to tell. Long neck, massive body, wings that blocked out the stars." Kelly's voice dropped to a whisper. "It looked like a dragon." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Dragons were myths, creatures from ancient human folklore. They didn't exist in the real world, especially not on distant colony planets. Knox stopped the recording and turned to face Jake. Our xenobiology team has been analyzing the satellite data. The creature measures approximately 200 meters from nose to tail. It has 4 legs, 2 wings, and what appears to be natural armor plating along its back and sides. Where did it come from? Jake asked. Unknown. Our deep space sensors didn't detect any incoming ships or objects. It seems to have emerged from somewhere in the southern Crimson Wastes, possibly from underground cavern systems we haven't mapped yet. The display switched back to the continental map. A red line now traced the creature's movement pattern, starting from the deep desert and heading steadily north toward New Haven. At its current pace, the line projected that it would reach the city in less than a week. We've tried everything, Knox continued. Orbital bombardment, missile strikes, even experimental plasma weapons fired from our defense platforms. Nothing penetrates its hide. The energy just seems to get absorbed or deflected. Jake studied the movement pattern more closely. The creature wasn't wandering randomly through the desert. Its path showed clear intelligence, avoiding the worst terrain while maintaining a steady course toward the city. That bothered him more than the failed weapons tests. What about evacuation? Jake asked. 12 million people? Where would we put them? Every transport ship in the system couldn't move that many civilians, and we don't have anywhere to take them anyway. New Haven is our only major settlement on this world. General Knox walked over to a secure terminal and entered his access codes. A new file appeared on the main screen, marked with the highest classification level. This is why I called you here, Morrison. The City Council met in emergency session this morning. They've authorized a single-person reconnaissance and elimination mission. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had led dangerous missions before, but always with a full squad of trained soldiers. Going alone against something that had shrugged off orbital bombardment seemed like suicide. Sir, with respect, one person can't accomplish what our entire defense fleet couldn't, Jake said carefully. Knox nodded. Under normal circumstances, you'd be right. But this isn't a normal military operation. We're not sending you out there to fight the creature head-on. Your mission is intelligence gathering first, with elimination only if you can find a weakness our satellites missed. The general pulled up another screen, showing detailed equipment lists. You'll have access to our most advanced gear. Experimental weapons, portable shield generators, long-range communication equipment. Everything our research division has been developing for the past 5 years. Jake looked at the mission parameters displayed on the screen. Proceed alone into the Crimson Wastes. Locate and observe the hostile creature. Determine its capabilities, weaknesses, and motivations if possible. Neutralize the threat if an opportunity presents itself. Return to New Haven with actionable intelligence. When do I leave? Jake asked. Tomorrow at dawn. Use tonight to study everything we know about the creature and plan your approach. Morrison, I know this is asking a lot, but you're the best we have. If anyone can find a way to stop this thing, it's you. Jake saluted and gathered the mission files. As he headed back to his quarters, his mind raced with tactical considerations. Equipment selection, route planning, contingency protocols, if communication was lost. But underneath all the professional analysis, one thought kept nagging at him. The creature's movement pattern looked familiar somehow, as if he had seen that particular style of navigation before. It reminded him of something from his childhood, though he couldn't place exactly what. The memory felt important, but it slipped away every time he tried to focus on it. That night, Jake sat in his apartment reviewing satellite footage of the new creature. In the clearest images, he could make out details of its massive form. The way it moved across the desert landscape showed a strange kind of grace, as if it belonged there. Its head turned occasionally to survey the terrain ahead, and in those moments, Jake caught glimpses of what looked almost like intelligence in its posture. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake found himself thinking about his family for the first time in months. His parents had died years ago, and he had lost touch with most of his relatives when he joined the military. There had been a younger brother once, but that was ancient history now. Alex had been lost during the great colony ship evacuations when Jake was still a teenager. Tomorrow, he would venture into the wasteland to face a creature that defied explanation. Tonight, for reasons he couldn't understand, Jake Morrison dreamed of home. Jake Morrison left New Haven before sunrise, the city's lights fading behind him as he rode his military hoverbike into the darkness. The machine was loaded with enough supplies for 2 weeks in the desert, plus experimental weapons that the research division had never tested in real combat. His route would take him south through the Crimson Wastes, following the trail of destruction left by the creature. The hoverbike moved silently across the red sand, its anti-gravity engines making only a soft humming sound. Jake had chosen this model because it was fast, quiet, and could handle rough terrain. In the wasteland, staying hidden might be more important than heavy firepower. As the sun rose over the desert, Jake got his first real look at the landscape he would be crossing. The Crimson Wastes stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of red sand broken by jagged rock formations and deep canyons. The sand got its color from iron oxide in the soil, the same mineral that made Mars look red from space. But unlike Mars, this world had breathable air and enough water to support human life. Jake made good time across the flat sections of desert. The hoverbike skimmed over sand dunes that would have stopped a wheeled vehicle, and its navigation system kept him on course toward the first destroyed mining station. He stopped every few hours to check his equipment and scan the horizon for any sign of the creature. By noon, Jake reached the outer edge of mining station Alpha 7. He parked the hoverbike behind a large boulder and approached the ruins on foot. Nothing could have prepared him for what he found there. The destruction was even worse than the satellite images had shown. Metal beams that once supported the main processing facility had been twisted into impossible shapes, like someone had grabbed them and tied them in knots while the metal was still hot. The concrete foundation had melted and reformed into smooth, flowing curves that looked more like art than industrial accident. Jake walked carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching on fragments of glass and metal. His scanner detected no radiation, no toxic chemicals, no sign of conventional weapons. Whatever had done this, it wasn't using human technology. Near the center of the destroyed station, Jake found something that made him stop and stare. Rising from the melted concrete were dozens of crystal formations, each one perfectly clear and shaped like a twisted spear pointing toward the sky. The crystals were beautiful, catching the sunlight and breaking it into rainbow patterns that danced across the ruins. Jake touched one of the crystals with his gloved hand. It was warm, and he could feel a slight vibration running through it, as if energy was flowing inside the crystal structure. His scanner showed that the formations were made of pure silicon, but arranged in ways that didn't match any natural crystal growth patterns. As Jake continued exploring the ruins, he found more crystals scattered throughout the wreckage. Each one was unique, but they all shared the same impossible perfection of form. They looked like they had been grown rather than created, shaped by some force that understood both science and art. The trail leading away from the station was easy to follow. The creature had left footprints in the sand, each one large enough for Jake to lie down inside. The prints were deep and clearly defined, showing that whatever made them was incredibly heavy. But what interested Jake more was the pattern of the footprints. The creature hadn't been stumbling around randomly. Its steps were evenly spaced and purposeful, following a path that avoided the worst terrain while heading directly toward its next target. Jake had seen similar movement patterns during his military training. When soldiers were taught to move efficiently across difficult ground, Jake followed the trail for several hours, stopping occasionally to examine individual footprints more closely. The creature had 4 legs, but its gait was unlike any animal Jake knew. The footprints showed that it could change its stride length and step pattern depending on the terrain, adapting its movement to maintain speed and balance as afternoon turned to evening. Jake reached a ridge overlooking mining station Beta 12. The second station had been built in a small valley, protected from sandstorms by the surrounding hills. Now it was as destroyed as the first station, with the same twisted metal and crystal formations scattered throughout the ruins. Jake set up camp on the ridge, where he could observe the destroyed station while remaining hidden. He ate a quick meal and settled down to study the scene below through his binoculars. The setting sun cast long shadows across the wreckage, making the crystal formations glow like alien flowers in a field of twisted metal. Something about the destruction pattern bothered Jake. At first glance, it looked like random violence, but the more he studied it, the more he saw signs of control. The metal hadn't just been melted and reformed, it had been shaped with precision. Some of the larger pieces created archways and curves that were almost architectural in design. Jake spent the evening reviewing the data from both destroyed stations. The crystals appeared at both sites, always in the same type of formation. The metal damage followed similar patterns, as if the same force had created both scenes. But there was something else, something that nagged at the back of his mind. The overall layout of the destruction reminded him of something from his childhood, but he couldn't place the memory. It felt important, like a clue he was missing, but every time he tried to focus on it, the thought slipped away. That night, Jake dreamed of his younger brother Alex. In the dream, they were children again, playing in the ruins of an old mining station that had been abandoned years before their family arrived on the colony world. Alex had always been fascinated by the leftover machinery, spending hours arranging pieces of scrap metal into elaborate sculptures that only he could understand. Jake woke before dawn, disturbed by the vividness of the dream. He hadn't thought about Alex in years, not since the transport accident that had taken his brother's life during the Great Evacuation. Alex had been only 12 years old, full of curiosity and creativity, always building things with whatever materials he could find. Jake pushed the memories aside and focused on his mission. The third day of his journey would take him to mining station Delta 9, where the survivor Kelly Brown had seen the creature. From there, he would have to track it into the deep desert, where satellite coverage was limited and communication with New Haven would be difficult. The trail from Beta 12 led southeast into rougher terrain. Here the red sand gave way to rocky ground broken by deep canyons and towering stone formations. The creature's footprints were harder to follow on the hard rock, but Jake found other signs of its passage. Boulders had been moved aside, and in some places, the rock itself had been reshaped into smoother forms. By mid-morning, Jake reached the rim of the canyon, where mining station Delta 9 had been built. The station had been larger than the first, too, with multiple buildings and a landing pad for cargo ships. Now it was the same twisted wreckage, but here Jake could see the full scope of what had happened. The creature had approached from the north, its footprints clearly visible in the sandy approach to the canyon. But instead of attacking immediately, it had circled the station several times, as if studying the layout. Only then had it moved in and begun the destruction. Jake climbed down into the canyon to examine the ruins more closely. The crystal formations here were different, more complex and organized. Some of them formed geometric patterns that looked almost like circuit boards made of living crystal. Others created structures that resembled abstract sculptures, beautiful but alien in their design. Near the main building, Jake found something that made his heart race. Scratched into a piece of twisted metal were symbols that looked almost like writing. The marks were too regular to be random damage, too complex to be simple scratches. Someone or something had deliberately carved these symbols into the metal. Jake photographed the symbols and transmitted the images back to New Haven, along with his report on the 3 destroyed stations. The response came back within an hour. The linguistics team was analyzing the symbols, but their preliminary assessment was that they might represent some form of communication attempt. As Jake prepared to leave Delta 9 and continue following the trail, he noticed something else that troubled him. The creature's path from this station was different from its previous movement. Before, it had been heading directly toward New Haven. Now it was taking a more circuitous route, as if it was no longer in a hurry to reach the city. The footprints led deeper into the canyon system, where the walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, and the sky was just a narrow strip of blue overhead. Jake followed carefully, aware that he was entering terrain where an ambush would be almost impossible to escape. That evening, Jake camped in a sheltered alcove in the canyon wall. As he sat eating his dinner, he studied the photographs he had taken of the crystal formations. There was something familiar about their structure, something that reminded him of the elaborate constructions his brother Alex used to build as a child. Jake shook his head, annoyed with himself for dwelling on ancient memories. Alex had been dead for over 20 years. These crystals were created by an alien creature that threatened his city and the people he had sworn to protect. There was no connection between his lost brother and the destruction he was investigating. Jake woke on his 5th day in the desert to the sound of distant rumbling. At first, he thought it might be thunder, but the sky was clear and blue above the canyon walls. The sound came from somewhere ahead, deep and rhythmic like a massive heartbeat echoing through the stone. Jake packed his gear quickly and climbed to a higher position on the canyon wall. From there, he could see that the sound was coming from a large crater about 2 miles to the southeast. Through his binoculars, he could make out movement in the crater, something large shifting in the morning shadows. The creature was there. After 5 days of following its trail through the wasteland, Jake had finally caught up with it. Jake studied the terrain between his position and the crater. The ground was mostly open desert with scattered rock formations that could provide cover for his approach. If he was careful, he could get close enough to observe the creature without being detected. Jake left his hoverbike hidden in the canyon and proceeded on foot, carrying only his essential equipment. The experimental weapons felt heavy on his back, but he knew he might need them if things went wrong. The mission files had been clear about one thing the creature had destroyed. Everything it encountered so far. It took Jake 2 hours to reach the rim of the crater. The formation was huge, almost a mile across and several hundred feet deep. At first, Jake thought it might be a natural formation, but as he studied it more closely, he realized it was too perfectly round. This crater had been created by some kind of impact or explosion that the remains of mining station Beta 12 lay scattered around the crater's edge. Jake recognized pieces of the processing equipment and living quarters, but they had been moved here from the original station site. The creature had transported the wreckage for some reason, arranging it in patterns around the crater rim. Jake found a concealed position behind a large boulder and set up his observation equipment. Through the telescopic sight, he could see down into the crater where the creature rested. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that met his eyes. The creature was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Its body was easily 200 meters long, covered in scales that shifted color in the morning light from deep red to golden brown. Massive wings were folded against its sides, and Jake could see the crystalline formations growing along its spine like a ridge of living jewels. But it was the creature's head that made Jake catch his breath. The skull was large and reptilian, but there was something about the bone structure that looked almost familiar. The creature's eyes were closed as it rested, but Jake could see intelligence in the way it held itself, even in sleep. Around the creature, the crater floor was covered with more crystal formations. These were larger and more complex than anything Jake had seen at the mining stations. Some grew in spirals that reached toward the sky, while others formed intricate geometric patterns that looked like three-dimensional puzzles. The crystals pulsed with soft light, creating a beautiful but alien landscape. Jake spent the morning observing and taking photographs. The creature seemed to be sleeping, but occasionally it would shift position or make soft sounds that echoed through the crater. Jake noted that the sounds weren't random. They had rhythm and pattern, almost like music. Around noon, the creature began to wake up. Jake watched as the massive head lifted and turned slowly from side to side, scanning the crater walls. When the creature's eyes opened, Jake felt a shock of recognition that he couldn't explain. The eyes were large and intelligent, but there was something achingly familiar about them. The creature stood up slowly, revealing its full size and power. Its movements were graceful despite its enormous bulk, and Jake could see the intelligence behind every gesture. This wasn't just a wild animal. It was something that could think and plan. As Jake watched, the creature began to work with the crystal formations around it, using some kind of energy that Jake couldn't detect with his instruments. The creature caused new crystals to grow from the crater floor. The process was beautiful to watch, like flowers blooming in fast motion. But the crystals that emerged were perfectly shaped and positioned. Jake realized he was watching the creature create something. The crystal formations weren't random. They were being arranged in specific patterns that served some purpose. The creature was building something, though Jake couldn't guess what it might be. The creature worked for several hours, pausing occasionally to study its progress. During one of these pauses, it turned its head directly toward Jake's hiding place. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Jake felt something impossible happen. A voice spoke in Jake's mind, not with words, but with thoughts and emotions that bypassed his ears entirely. The mental contact was overwhelming, filled with loneliness, pain, and a desperate need for connection. Jake gasped and nearly fell from his hiding place as foreign memories flooded his consciousness. He saw flashes of images that weren't his own. A small boy trapped in a crashing transport ship, calling for help that never came. The same boy, older now, alone on a barren world as his body began to change in ways that defied understanding. Years of isolation and transformation growing. Larger and more powerful, but also more alone. The visions came faster now, showing the boy's desperate attempts to make contact with other humans. Failed attempts at communication that were interpreted as attacks. The loneliness of being the only one of his kind, unable to make others understand that he meant no harm. When the mental contact ended, Jake found himself lying flat on the ground. Behind the boulder, his head spinning from the experience. He looked up to see the creature standing at the bottom of the crater, its massive head turned toward his position. There was no hostility in its posture, only awaiting patience. Jake stood up slowly, his hands shaking as he reached for his weapons. But something stopped him from drawing them. The memories he had experienced felt too real, too personal to be fabrications. The loneliness and pain in them reminded him of something from his own past. The creature made a sound, low and musical. It echoed through the crater. Jake felt the mental contact return, gentler this time, like a careful touch rather than a flood. Through the connection, he sensed the creature's curiosity and hope. It wanted to communicate, to make him understand something important. Jake found himself walking forward, leaving his concealed position and approaching the crater rim. He knew it was dangerous, that the creature could kill him easily if it chose to, but something in the mental contact told him he was safe. The creature had no intention of harming him. At the crater's edge, Jake looked down at the enormous being below. Up close, he could see more details of its appearance. The scales were not just armor, they were beautiful iridescent surfaces that reflected light in complex patterns. The crystalline formations along its spine pulsed with soft energy, and Jake could see now that they were somehow connected to the creature's nervous system. The creature's head lowered until it was only a few feet away from where Jake stood. This close, Jake could see the familiar bone structure more clearly. The shape of the skull, the spacing of the eyes, even the way the creature held its head reminded him of someone he had once known. Through the mental link, Jake felt the creature's excitement and nervousness. It was trying to show him something, to make him understand a truth that it had been carrying alone for too long. Images flashed through Jake's mind, memories of a childhood spent building elaborate structures from scrap metal and broken machinery. Jake's breath caught in his throat as recognition hit him like a physical blow. The memories weren't from some alien mind. They were human memories, distorted by time and transformation, but unmistakably real. The boy in the visions, the one who had been alone and changed by forces beyond his control, wasn't a stranger. Creature lowered its head further, bringing one enormous eye level with Jake's face. Through the mental connection, Jake felt a familiar presence, a consciousness that he had known since childhood. The creature spoke a single concept into his mind, a name that it had held onto through decades of isolation and change. Alex, the voice whispered in Jake's thoughts, and Jake knew with absolute certainty that he was looking into the eyes of his long-lost brother. Jake fell to his knees at the crater's edge, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what he was experiencing. Alex had died in the transport accident 20 years ago. That's what the official record said. That's what Jake had believed all this time. But the consciousness touching his mind was unmistakably his brother, changed beyond recognition, but still fundamentally the same person Jake had known as a child. Alex had survived the crash, but the exotic radiation from the ship's experimental drive had transformed him into something that was no longer entirely human. Through their renewed mental connection, Jake felt his brother's joy at finally being recognized, mixed with sorrow for all the years they had been apart. Alex had been searching for him, following Colonial Defense Force movements from world to world, hoping for a chance to make contact. The destroyed mining stations hadn't been attacks. They had been desperate attempts at communication. Alex had been trying to create signals that would attract attention, hoping that someone would understand his true nature. Jake spent the night in the crater with his brother, learning about the 20 years they had been apart. Through their mental connection, Alex shared the full story of what had happened to him after the transport crash. The memories came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming, but always filled with the pain of isolation and the hope of eventual reunion. The transport ship carrying Alex and dozens of other colonists, children had suffered a catastrophic failure in its experimental quantum drive. Most of the passengers and crew died instantly when the radiation burst through the ship's failing shields. Alex survived only because he had been playing in a storage compartment that was partially shielded by the ship's cargo, but the radiation that should have killed him instead began changing his body at the cellular level. Over weeks and months, as Alex survived alone on the crashed ship, his DNA was rewritten by forces that human science barely understood. He grew larger and stronger, developing abilities that defied natural law. Jake felt his brother's confusion and terror during those early days. Alex had been just 12 years old, suddenly alone on a hostile world with no way to call for help. The radio equipment had been destroyed in the crash, and Alex's changing body made it impossible for him to operate the surviving technology got as months turned to years. Alex learned to survive in his new form. His enhanced mind allowed him to understand complex systems that had been beyond his childhood comprehension. He discovered that he could manipulate matter at the molecular level, reshaping metal and stone with focused thought. The ability frightened him at first, but eventually became his primary tool for survival. Alex showed Jake memories of his first attempts to create the crystal formations. The crystals weren't just art, they were communication devices, designed to transmit signals across vast distances. Alex had spent years learning to control his molecular manipulation abilities, creating increasingly sophisticated structures in hopes that someone would recognize them as artificial and investigate. "I never stopped looking for you," Alex's voice whispered in Jake's mind. "I followed Colonial Defense Force movements, searched every database I could access. When I learned you were stationed on this world, I couldn't stay away any longer." Jake felt his brother's excitement at discovering that Jake was on Kepler 442b. But Alex's approach to the planet had been detected by automated defense systems, forcing him to hide in the deep desert. His attempts to make contact with the mining stations had been desperate acts of loneliness, not aggression. Through Alex's memories, Jake experienced the night mining station Alpha 7 was destroyed. Alex had approached carefully, trying not to frighten the human workers. But his size and appearance had caused immediate panic. In his excitement to finally make contact, Alex had lost control of his molecular manipulation abilities. The twisted metal and crystal formations hadn't been intentional destruction. They were the result of Alex's emotional state affecting the matter around him. His joy, desperation, and frustration had all translated into chaotic changes in the physical world. By the time Alex realized what was happening, the damage was done and the humans were gone. "I tried to fix it," Alex shared, showing Jake his C. attempts to repair the damage. "But every time I touched anything, my emotions made it worse. I was so angry at myself, so sad that I had scared them away." Jake felt tears running down his face as he experienced his brother's anguish. Alex had spent decades learning to control his powers, but the shock of finally encountering other humans had overwhelmed his careful discipline. Each subsequent encounter with mining stations had ended the same way, with Alex's emotional state causing unintended destruction. Jake learned about the symbols Alex had carved into the metal at Delta 9. They weren't random marks, they were Alex's attempt to write his own name, using a script he had developed during his years of isolation. Alex had hoped that someone would recognize the symbols as language and understand that an intelligent being was trying to communicate. As dawn approached, Alex began showing Jake the full extent of his abilities. The crystal formations in the crater weren't just random sculptures, they were components of a vast communication network. Alex had been building similar structures across multiple worlds, creating a system that could transmit messages across interstellar distances. "I wanted to find other people like me," Alex explained through their mental link. "I thought maybe there were others who had been changed by the same kind of radiation. I've been alone for so long, Jake. You can't imagine what it's like to be the only one of your kind." Jake watched as Alex demonstrated his molecular manipulation abilities on a small scale. With careful concentration, Alex could reshape matter at will, turning sand into crystal, metal into flowing art, or stone into precise geometric forms. The process required enormous mental discipline, and Jake could feel the strain it put on his brother's mind. "The crystals help me focus," Alex said, gesturing toward the formations around them. "They store and channel energy in ways that make my abilities more stable. Without them, my emotions affect everything around me." Jake began to understand the true scope of what his brother had become. Alex wasn't just physically transformed, he was evolving into something that transcended normal human limitations. His mind could process information at superhuman speeds, and his abilities bordered on what most people would call magic. But underneath all the power and transformation, Alex was still the curious, creative child Jake remembered. His love of building and creating had survived his physical changes. expressed now through crystal sculptures and molecular art instead of scrap metal constructions. "I never stopped being your brother," Alex said, sensing Jake's thoughts. "Everything I am now started with what I was then. The radiation just gave me new ways to express the same dreams." As the sun rose higher, Jake realized that their reunion was just the beginning of a much larger problem. Alex was still heading toward New Haven, and the city's leaders still saw him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Jake had been sent to destroy his brother, and his failure to report back would soon trigger military action. "They'll send ships," Jake said aloud, his words carrying through their mental link. "If I don't check in soon, General Knox will assume something happened to me. They'll come looking with everything they have." Alex's emotional response rippled through their connection, fear, sadness, and determination mixing together. He had spent 20 years dreaming of reunion with his family, only to discover that his appearance made him an enemy to the very people he wanted to rejoin. "I won't run anymore," Alex declared. "I'm tired of hiding, tired of being alone. If they want to fight me, I'll defend myself. But I won't leave you again, Jake, not after we just found each other." Jake felt his brother's resolve and knew that a direct confrontation would be a disaster for everyone involved. Alex's abilities made him nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, but a fight with the Colonial Defense Force would force him into a role he didn't want the monster that the city's leaders already believed him to be. "There has to be another way," Jake said, his mind racing through possibilities. "We need to make them understand what you really are. If I can convince them that you're not a threat, maybe we can find a peaceful solution." Through their mental link, Jake felt Alex's skepticism. His brother had tried peaceful contact before, and it had always ended in misunderstanding and conflict. But Jake was different. He was a trusted military officer with the authority to speak for the city's defense forces. "You could come with me," Jake suggested. "If you approach New Haven slowly, giving them time to adjust, maybe I can prepare them for what they'll see." Alex considered the proposal, his powerful mind analyzing hundreds of variables in seconds. The approach would be risky for both of them. If the city's leaders decided that Jake had been compromised or corrupted, they might attack without warning. But Alex was tired of running and hiding. He wanted to live among humans again, to use his abilities to help rather than frighten. The crystal communication networks he had been building were just the beginning of what he could offer humanity. "I can help them," Alex said, sharing visions of the technologies he could create. "My abilities could solve problems they don't even know they have. Energy production, manufacturing, terraforming entire worlds could be transformed by what I've learned." Jake saw through Alex's memories the wonders his brother could create. Cities that grew like living things, energy systems that drew power from the fabric of space itself, transportation networks that could move people between stars in minutes instead of years. Alex had spent his isolation learning to understand the fundamental forces of the universe. "They'll be afraid," Jake warned. "Humans always fear what they don't understand." "Then we'll have to help them understand," Alex replied. "Starting with you. I need you to see everything I've become, everything I can do. Only then can you convince them that I'm not their enemy." Alex opened their mental connection fully, sharing not just memories, but his complete consciousness. Jake felt his brother's mind expand around him, vast and complex beyond human comprehension, but still fundamentally familiar. At the core of all that power and knowledge was the same person Jake had grown up with, unchanged by decades of transformation. Jake rode his hoverbike back toward New Haven at maximum speed, leaving Alex behind in the crater with a promise to return within 3 days. The journey that had taken him 5 days to complete now passed in a blur of red sand and rocky terrain. Jake's mind raced faster than his vehicle, planning how he would convince the city's leaders that their greatest threat was actually their greatest opportunity. The city's defense towers came into view just as the sun was setting. Jake felt a strange mix of homecoming and dread as he approached the familiar walls. New Haven looked exactly the same as when he had left a week ago, but Jake knew that everything was about to change forever. General Knox was waiting in the command center when Jake arrived. The older man's face showed relief, mixed with concern as Jake walked through the doors, still covered in desert dust and looking exhausted from his journey. "Morrison, thank God you made it back," Knox said, rushing forward to greet him. "We lost your signal 3 days ago. We were preparing a search and rescue mission." Jake nodded, trying to appear calm despite the storm of emotions in his mind. "I found the creature, sir. I made contact with it." Knox's expression changed instantly, from relief to shock. "Contact? Jake, that thing destroyed 3 mining stations. How are you still alive?" "Because it doesn't want to hurt anyone," Jake said carefully. "Sir, I need to brief you and the city council immediately. What I discovered changes everything we thought we knew about the situation." An hour later, Jake stood before the emergency council session in New Haven's main government building. Mayor Lessa Harper sat at the head of the table, flanked by General Knox and the other city leaders. Their faces showed skepticism and worry as Jake began his presentation. "The creature is not hostile," Jake said, displaying the photographs he had taken in the crater. "The destruction at the mining stations was accidental, caused by the being's inability to control its abilities when it became emotional." Council member Robert Chon shook his head. "Morrison, you're asking us to believe that a 200-meter dragon accidentally destroyed 3 industrial facilities?" "I'm asking you to look at the evidence," Jake replied, switching to images of the crystal formations. "These structures aren't random destruction. They're communication devices created by an intelligence that has been trying to make contact with us for months." Jake spent an hour explaining what he had learned, carefully avoiding any mention of his personal connection to the creature. He showed them the symbols Alex had carved, the purposeful arrangement of the crystal networks, and the sophisticated technology behind the molecular manipulation abilities. "Even if what you're saying is true," Mayor Harper said slowly, "this being still represents a massive danger to our city. Its emotional outbursts destroyed 3 mining stations. What happens if it has another accident near our population centers?" "That's why I'm proposing a controlled first contact," Jake said. "The being wants to communicate. It's been trying to reach us for months. If we can establish proper communication protocols, we can prevent any more accidents." General Knox leaned forward in his chair. "Jake, you're talking about bringing that thing near our city. 12 million lives are at stake here. Sir, with respect, those 12 million lives could benefit enormously from contact with this being." Jake said, "The technology it possesses could revolutionize our civilization. Energy production, manufacturing, space travel, everything could be transformed." The council debated for hours. Some members supported Jake's proposal for peaceful contact, while others argued for immediate military action. Jake found himself fighting not just for his brother's life, but for humanity's future. Finally, Mayor Harper called for a vote. "All those in favor of Commander Morrison's first contact protocol?" 4 hands went up. Those opposed? 5 hands rose, with 2 abstentions. Jake felt his heart sink as the vote failed. General Knox stood up from his chair. "Morrison, I'm sorry, but the council has decided. We'll give the creature 24 hours to leave our territory peacefully. If it doesn't comply, we'll use orbital bombardment to eliminate the threat." "Sir, you can't," Jake said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This being could be the key to humanity's next evolutionary step. You'd be destroying something irreplaceable." "The decision is final," Knox replied. "You're to remain in the city until this situation is resolved. That's an order." Jake left the council chamber, knowing he had failed. In less than 24 hours, New Haven's orbital defense platforms would begin bombarding the crater where Alex waited. Jake couldn't let that happen, but he was trapped in the city under military supervision. That night, Jake made his choice. He slipped out of his quarters and made his way to the city's communications center. Using his security clearance, he accessed the long-range transmitter and sent a coded message toward the crater. Alex would understand the warning and could escape before the bombardment began. But Alex's response, transmitted through the crystal network, surprised Jake. His brother wasn't planning to run. Instead, Alex was coming to New Haven. "I won't hide anymore." Alex's mental voice reached Jake across the distance. "If they want to see what I am, I'll show them. But I'll do it my way." Jake tried to argue, but Alex had already broken the connection. Through the night, satellite sensors tracked the creature's movement as it left the crater and began heading north toward the city. But its approach was different this time. Instead of the steady march that had characterized its earlier movement, Alex was taking his time. As dawn broke over New Haven, the city's early warning systems detected the approaching creature. But instead of sounding attack alarms, the sensors registered something unprecedented. The creature had stopped just outside the city's defensive perimeter and was creating something. Jake watched from the command center as satellite images showed Alex at work. Using his molecular manipulation abilities, his brother was reshaping the desert sand into massive crystal formations that grew like flowers, looming in fast motion. Within hours, a garden of living crystal surrounded the southern approach to New Haven. The crystal structures were beautiful beyond description, each one unique but part of a larger artistic vision. They caught the morning sunlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns that could be seen from miles away. But more than just art, the crystals were functional. They generated clean energy that the city's sensors could detect from orbit. "It's not attacking," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. "The creature is just creating." Alex worked through the morning, building a crystal garden that stretched for miles. Each formation was more beautiful than the last, and the energy output continued to grow. By noon, the crystal network was generating enough power to supply half of New Haven's energy needs. Mayor Harper stood at the command center's main window, staring out at the distant crystal formations. "It's magnificent," she whispered. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Jake felt hope returning as he watched the city's leaders react to Alex's display. His brother wasn't demonstrating his power as a weapon. He was showing his abilities as a gift to humanity. "Sir," Jake said to General Knox, "I request permission to go out there and establish formal contact." Knox hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Take a full diplomatic team with you. And Morrison, if this goes wrong, it's on both our heads." Jake led a small group of officials toward the crystal garden, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. As they approached the edge of the formations, Alex emerged from behind one of the larger crystals. The officials gasped at his size and majesty, but Jake stepped forward without hesitation. "Hello, Alex," Jake said aloud, knowing that his brother would hear both his words and his thoughts. Alex lowered his massive head in greeting. Ben spoke directly into the minds of all present. His mental voice was gentle and warm, filled with hope and nervous excitement. "Hello, brother. Hello, friends. I've waited so long to meet you." The formal introduction took place in the crystal garden, with Alex demonstrating his abilities while Jake translated and explained. The city officials watched in amazement as Alex created new crystal formations before their eyes, each one designed to serve a specific purpose for the city: energy collectors, water purification systems, communication, networks that could reach across the galaxy. All of these were within Alex's ability to create. He offered them freely to New Haven, asking only for the chance to live among humans again, by evening. The first treaty between baseline humanity and evolved humanity was signed in the Crystal Garden. Alex would serve as New Haven's protector and technological advisor, while the city would provide him with the social contact he had craved. For 20 years, Jake stood beside his brother as the sun set over their transformed world. The crystal formations glowed softly in the twilight, creating a landscape that looked like something from a dream. In the distance, New Haven's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "We did it," Jake said, placing his hand on one of Alex's massive claws. "We actually did it." Through their mental link, Jake felt his brother's contentment and joy. After 20 years of isolation and transformation, Alex was finally home. He wasn't the same person he had been as a child, but he was still fundamentally Jake's brother. The bonds of family had proven stronger than any physical change.